This afternoon, we're happy to be going on studio visits and to hear about the work and life of two of our favorite artists. And I don't just say favorite like a word that I casually throw out. These two artists are really two of our favorites, and I'd even go as far as to say they're two of our favorite people. Anyway, we LEk Jeyifous, popularly known as LEk. He presented and took part in last year's iteration of Studio to the Street. And Mark Reigelman, we go back so far with him that Land Studio didn't even exist when we first came across him. So we'd like to thank the citizens of Cuyahoga County who, through Cuyahoga Arts and Culture, have made Studio to the Street possible. Besides providing support to local arts organizations and events, CAC has also contributed millions of dollars over the past several years directly to local artists in its mission of building the capacity of our community of local artists. During today's presentation, we ask that you keep your camera on. You might want to go to speaker view so you can see more directly who's presenting at the moment. At any time, if you have any questions, please just put them in the chat box and we'll be monitoring that. We will have an open Q&A session after the artists present, and at that time you can just raise your hand or blurt out a question. So we will do it both ways. At the end, or sometime after the event today, you'll be given a survey that we'd ask you to complete just to let us know what worked for you today during our presentation and what things that we could possibly improve. I think that's all I have to say. So now I'm going to turn it over to Erin Guido to introduce our artists.
Thanks, Vince. Hi, everyone. Vince definitely said what I was going to say. I'm really excited to be here with Mark and LEk because working with them, it's always really fun and we learn a lot, and they're just very good people. And I'm really excited today to have them here together because one of my goals after this is that they become best friends and collaborate on a project. Mm-hmm. And so I think this is the beginning of that blossoming friendship. But I first met Mark as an intern at Cleveland Public Art, as Vince said, before Land Studio even existed. And I got to help him glue thousands of red pool noodles together for the first Cleveland Museum of Art Solstice Party. So way back then, I loved working with Mark. And since then, Land has been able to work with Mark on some fantastic projects, including the Edgewater Hill Bluebirds, the Reading Nest at the Cleveland Public Library, and the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame's Rock Box installation, just to name a few. This year, he was named as one of the 11 winners of the 38th Annual Awards for Excellence in Design from the New York City Public Design Commission. And actually, LEk was one of the artists that received that award too. So it's pretty cool that they're two of the 11 winners. Mark has done projects all over the world, including formation on the facade of San Diego's International Airport and the amazing playground Sweetwater as part of James Corner Field Operation designed waterfront in space in Williamsburg. As for LEk, I first got to work with him when he created the amazing protest installation, which was originally installed on Public Square and is now permanently installed at the Cleveland Public Library's Langston Hughes branch. As Vince mentioned, you might also remember LEk if you came to last year's Studio the Street event. And we thought it would be really cool, since a lot of you got to meet him in person, that you would be able to see inside his actual studio today. So that's why we invited him back. LEk has done projects and created public art all over the world too, including a new installation at Alexandria, Virginia's waterfront park, a giant Coachella installation, tons of indoor and outdoor murals. And he is the co-designer of the winning Shirley Chisholm Monument design plan for Brooklyn, New York. So we're really excited to be here. Like Vince said, if you do speaker view right now, that can be helpful. The artists, some of them, they might have two cameras going just so you have two views. So just in case you're confused why there's two of them, it's just for the another view. But it also helps if you pin the person that's speaking. So you might, Mark's gonna go first. So you might wanna pin him so you can see a good view of his studio, and then you can pin LEk's view, and then you can go to the whole group when we start talking. And feel free to add questions in the chat, like Vince said, during their studio visit. Vince and I can ask them, and then after that, you can ask questions out loud or put them in the chat. So with that, I'm gonna put it over to Mark. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Erin. Hey, everyone. Land Studio, thank you very much for having me. Watching these series has been really cool. It's nice to see the impact that you've had on so many artists, aside from me. So that's very, very cool. And it seems like these studio to the streets interactions have been very, very popular. A lot of people have been talking about them. So again, I'm very happy to be part of it. And Lek, I've admired your work for a long time. So being kind of in the same digital space as you is very exciting. So thank you. And we'll definitely have to get that coffee once we're vaccinated. So I'm going to, before I jump into the studio, it'll be a quick tour. It's a small space, but I wanted to give some context of my work. So I'm going to jump over to a short presentation. Erin, can you give me a thumbs up if you could see it? Cool. All right. So my name is Mark Reigelman. I studied at the Cleveland Institute of Art. And hold on one second. There we go. Where I was very interested in industrial design and sculpture. I didn't particularly enjoy either one in isolation. So I spent a good 2 years trying to figure out what the heck they could do together. And it was kind of a hard struggle for me. I wasn't exposed to much public art or public engagement at the time, so I wasn't too familiar with that field. And so I kind of had to discover it a bit on my own. And that discovery really started from a book called Bowling Alone by Robert Putnam. And in this book, he talks about the social decline in America over the past 50 years. And he talks about how important that social interaction is. Things as simple as casual eye contact, a good morning, hello, a nod, a simple hand gesture to acknowledge someone else's presence. And in communities that have more of this are wealthier and healthier and happier. And the list goes on and on and on about the positive ramifications for something as simple as casual interaction. And for me, Robert also talks about or suggests the role that art and design can play in acting as a catalyst for this social interaction. So after reading this book, I was very excited. It really started laying out the roadmap of kind of a potential avenue for me to explore artistically. And so the first project as my thesis project in school was to focus on bus shelters in Cleveland. These are spaces where people are gathering, but having no conversation whatsoever. There's an unwritten rule that you should not talk to your neighbor in a bus shelter. So I thought maybe this was an issue of materials. So they're kind of off-putting materials, glass, metal, fiberglass. They're very kind of cold. And so the idea was, I will just retrofit it with materials from the home, and clearly everyone will just talk like they're around their dinner table. It wasn't extremely successful, but it did allow me to kind of dip my toe in the water of public space. And I got really excited about it. I like the scale. I like the complexity. This was the first time that I was introduced to Vince. And this is, I think, 2001 or something. Introduced to Vince and Greg, Erin, all the other folks at what was at that point Cleveland Public Art. So they really helped and encouraged me to explore more, not let this be the kind of final thing. So from this point on, it was very clear what I was interested in doing creatively, and that is to encourage social interaction in public spaces and explore all the potential ways of doing it. So from that point on, I was very focused on site-specific public work and wearing the many hats that is required to do this work kind of thoughtfully and successfully. The idea being that I will come to a site without a preconceived notion of what should exist. And through community engagement, kind of a transparent and collaborative process, historical research, site documentation, all these things to help the site inform the work, and really me just being kind of a gatherer and sifter in ways. And the formal output of this process varies greatly. So smokers, for instance, was just a couple of minutes or a couple of seconds, these installations, where I'm wheeling around this very large wooden structure and resting them over top of manhole covers throughout lower Manhattan, so the steam can kind of go through this vessel and out through the top to really highlight this industrial infrastructure. Whereas the Great Picnic is extremely utilitarian. Conceptual narrative really falls secondary to utility. This thing has to work well. It has to be modular so it could fit in different spaces, and it needed to be able to seat 100 people comfortably for a large gathering. Some projects are more iconic. Upriver, downriver, I was really interested in how Louisville started as a city, and I wanted to kind of make an homage to those early travelers. And this project is bold and colorful and really encourages people to visit a part of the Louisville waterfront they might not otherwise go to. And installations that focus on sound. Rock Boxes in Cleveland was my first real sound installation. The idea here being that I wanted to remind Clevelanders that the city was built on rock and roll. And so these speakers dispersed throughout Cleveland kind of every hour send out these sound waves just as a constant reminder of Cleveland's roots. And one of my more kind of significant or complex projects is Sweetwater, a playground in Domino Park. It was a really incredible opportunity, a super weird and fun project. And the project here, I wanted to kind of make a mini factory where kids enter the site as sugarcane and they go through the refining process. They get kind of chopped up, spit out, filtered, and at the end they get discarded as kind of contaminants, raw sugar, or molasses. And so this project was really exciting for me because I've not experienced the type of social interaction that this project created with any other project. Like, this was just absolutely incredible, and it's fun to go see it and just see the cross section of people using it on a day-to-day basis. And of course the many other projects that I've had an awesome time creating and collaborating with: Manifest Destiny, Formation, the Reading Nest in New York Public Library, Bluebirds, Rap in Downtown Cleveland, and Stair Squares. So these projects are all quite labor intensive. They typically take a year, 2, 3, 4, or 5 to create, and they're fairly substantial. And so my studio space doesn't necessarily reflect their scale. And it's a kind of a unique challenge to create large works in a small space. So I'm going to go through my space, talk a little bit about my process, and let you know kind of how the heck this works. And so I'm going to go to camera 2. Camera 2. Can you hear me?
Yep. Thanks, Mark.
Sweet. Let me just rotate this. Okay. So my studio space is a little under 800 square feet. I do have the luxury of having a nice wall of windows, so I get really great natural light. And the studio is kind of part graveyard for completed projects and kind of part inspiration for current projects. And I'm constantly keeping things out and moving them around and rearranging because I like to kind of see all these things comparatively. So these are some early Formation prototypes where we're trying to figure out the casting tolerances to make installation be significantly more smoother. Images of potential album covers I've been developing for a pianist, Ning Yu. So you see this kind of stuff around. And lots of just materials, sketches, drawing, and stuff. This over here is primarily where my samples are, because I like to see how light reflects and moves, and how they cast shadows and things like that. So a lot of this stuff over here is just material samples. Here's some really gorgeous material samples, all laser cut stainless, this, and laser cut steel down here. This is for a project I'm working on in Columbus, Lori, the project manager there, is on the call, so I hope she is okay with me showing this.
Mark,
And I have,
what's that? Mark, what's that rose in the glass?
oh, this is a project that I did many years ago. The final one is like 13 feet tall and made out of Corten steel. But I made a couple of these smaller ones because it reminded me of like Beauty and the Beast. I thought it was so funny. So I would like, this is printed in plastic, and then this is 3D printed in steel. And so I just have it over here kind of with the other plants. Oh, this is the most important thing in the studio. Printer. And here's like different art stuff. This piece came back. This is a kind of glass encrusted shovel. This came back from a museum show. Here's some other miscellaneous drawings and sketches and stuff. The central space is like the primary workspace. So that involves kind of like a lot of reading and research area. Little models and things always sit out here. This is a good example of kind of taking two projects. This is a 3D print for that project in Columbus, the same one that the laser cut panels are. And this is a sample for a project I'm doing in Alexandria. That's the project, the kind of follow-up project to Lakes that's currently installed there. And I like to just kind of place materials from different projects together because you just kind of discover new weird things that are super cool. And so I really like the reflectivity of this and how the lines also reflect up on other surfaces. And so the central workspace, pre-pandemic, it would be kind of assistant 1 and assistant 2, depending on the project. Over here is my work desk. And I have the option of standing while working because I'm very jittery and move around a lot. So this is my main work area. Over here is kind of all my notebook sketchbooks, which I have per project. A ton of them are just a lot of words. My research, the first couple months of every project is just a ton of note taking. Every once in a while, I see kind of sketches through here, but a lot of it is just a lot of kind of words and weird sketches and drawings. And once things develop a little bit further, I move into kind of slightly more beautiful drawings. These are all just pen sketches on 11 by 17 paper. This is for a project in San Jose, a park there where I'm just developing different concepts to explore that space. The large board in the back that kind of looms over everything, that's the project board. So these are different projects that I'm currently developing. They're all at different stages. I spend a good bit of time making sure this board is constantly updated because I like to see all the projects next to each other to understand where maybe my current interests lie, or if there's kind of a color theme throughout projects or a pattern or something. I like to see them all up. I also try to arrange them so the process is available to me so I can kind of look back and remind myself, what was the point? What again was the point of this project? And so kind of title, and then a lot of research stuff, some research images, and then typically develop some sort of developmental drawings or models. My space is extremely tidy, and it typically is. It's just how I work. I allow some dirty space that's kind of back here. These are just different prototypes and things that I'm working on. All these parts are for installation at the New York Public Library. These will all be bronze cast objects ultimately, and working on weird little shredded paper studies just to see kind of pattern and things like that. Behind this curtain, I feel like an episode of Tiny Houses. So I try to hide behind here. We do a lot of like prototypes and small scale fabrication. All that stuff is hidden behind the curtain on kind of rolly carts. I'll try to back up so you can see it. So when we need to make smaller scale stuff, the chop saws, drill press, all that stuff is tucked away back there and all on rolling carts. We roll it all out and really rearrange the studio. We try to keep the studio as modular as possible in order just to have the flexibility to do stuff. Again, we're doing big projects in small spaces, so it does really require a lot of flexibility in order to do them. And I'll just kind of wrap around here. My wife said she really likes these types of things, just the weird little samples and prototypes. I just have sticking around. This guy right here, this is the inspiration for that smokers project. You know, you stick the incense underneath his butt, you put his butt on there, and then the smoke comes out of his mouth. So that's kind of like the same function as that smoker's house that I was pushing around Manhattan. If you don't have the Mark Reigelman is Awesome book, you should get it. It's a bestseller, New York Times bestseller. And then of course, kitchen and bathroom. So once I'm here, I don't have to leave. And that's pretty much it. I am very lucky to have this size space. It is still a challenge to make large works, but that's it.
Mark, how close is it to your house? Do you walk there or do you have to commute?
Oh, I have the luxury of walking, which is so great. It's a 1.5 miles away, so it's really the perfect distance to walk in the morning and then walk on the way back. And it's like a perfect time to get prepped and then a perfect time to cool down at the end of the day. So it's really ideal.
Cool. Well, thanks, Mark. Well, so we're now over to LEk Studio and Studio in Place, and then we can go back and then we'll have both of them sit down and answer your questions. But again, feel free to ask some questions in the chat while they're doing these tours, but then we'll come together and you guys can ask all the questions that you'd like.
Hello, can you hear me? Wonderful. That was a very awesome tour, Mark, and also really it's inspiring, right? You're giving me like ideas of how to better organize my own studio. So I'm gonna share screen right now and take you through a little bit of my practice. I am trained as an architect, but interestingly enough, my architectural work is speculative, right? And my artistic practice is actually the built work. So there's a sort of, very interesting juxtaposition, but all of my work is definitely informed by my background in architecture. And so I have a bunch of slides. I'll try and breeze through these. So a lot of my stuff is reimagining future worlds, either dystopian or heterotopian or utopian worlds. And so these next series of images is from a project called Shanty Megastructures for Lagos, Nigeria. And in these, sorry, I lost you guys for a second. In these images, I'm essentially looking at informal settlements throughout Lagos, Nigeria, and really projecting them up at the scale of sort of large scale urban development. The idea being to sort of extend visibility to a lot of these communities, a lot of these slums that are very often overlooked. I'm very much inspired by science fiction as well, right? So this is also a little bit of like sci-fi world building that I'm really imagining this kind of very organic community where the architecture sort of grows and evolves as the needs of the community necessitate, as well as how various technologies and sustainable practices are sort of deployed, right? Things like land reclamation and waste reuse. So I returned to Brooklyn, or actually, sorry, the next iteration of this project was first looking at the architecture. Now I'm examining kind of the interiority, what it looks like on the ground, what the kind of experiences of the community might look like. So now I'm operating sort of at the scale of the body, where my architectural interventions are examining things like, water filtration and these breathing masks, as well as sort of informal transportation. Again, very much inspired by like my fascination with science fiction as a way to examine contemporary issues. So these are just a series of very kind of analog, digital sort of collages between photographs that either I've taken or a friend of mine has taken throughout Africa, and then mixing in sort of these suggestive advanced technologies. Following that project and kind of during this pandemic, I returned to Brooklyn to do sort of a similar thing, to reimagine spaces, interstitial spaces in Brooklyn through this like sci-fi lens. So looking at rooftop spaces and then bringing in this intervention that I call the Bodega Eco Haven, right? So again, very much fascinated by the relationship between architecture, community, and the environment, and creating this sort of holistic sort of relationship between those three things. And so here's like an alleyway that I've turned into what I call the Bed-Stuy bubble farm. And so these little bubble sort of constructs are thinking about microclimates where you could possibly grow produce and vegetation that wouldn't be native to, North America. And this is like a scrap yard a few blocks away from me. So literally I've just been walking around my neighborhood, taking photographs and translating them into these sci-fi reimaginings. This is the Franklin Avenue shuttle, again, just a block away from me, thinking of, subway systems now being these virtual kiosks. And then this is actually on my rooftop again, where I'm thinking of like a rainwater harvest system. And so this would be kind of a, close-up view of what that looks like at eye level. So my public art practice then moves to a kind of much larger scale. And so my first real project was with the Coachella Valley Music and Arts Festival, and it was called Crown Ether. And so it's actually based off a series of these just collages that I'd made, like hand-cut collages called Hi-Fi Bastille. And so one of the curators, Rafi Lehrer, one of the assistant director, he saw those and thought it'd be great to translate them up to a very large scale. So this is like my early proposal for that, thinking of like this sort of treehouse space that's really elevated, but then a plinth below that people can kind of sit on. And so here are just some, breaking it down into kind of actually something that can be fabricated very quickly, because Coachella just occurs 2 weekends. So this is a very quick installation. And so this was 50 feet tall. And so this is, it pretty much, it was built within a weekend and then taken down within a weekend. But it's a 50-foot tall sculpture, with the plinth below, which is actually, very functional because it gets up to be like 115 degrees in the desert heat. Incredibly hot. So this provides shade. And so these are just a series of shots. Had a very nice nighttime sort of translation as well, with this sort of complicated lighting system that could, change the color of the installation, but also match kind of the beats of the music in the kind of area. So this was one of those things where I get a huge project up front. Very fortunate, and then very fortunate, of course, to have Land Studio come across and grant me this incredible opportunity to create Protest in Cleveland Public Square. And working with Aaron and Vince was absolutely incredible. And, the whole team. And a lot of my process, I really, as Mark mentioned, thinking about the site, the environment, historical references, really doing research. And Public Square is this site known for a long history of like protests and demonstrations taking place there. So I wanted to work on something that would reflect that. And so these are sort of like from my early proposal of thinking of 4 characters engaged in various forms of demonstration. And so, you have a more sort of aggressive one with the women yelling into the megaphone, and then a kind of reconciliation moment with the individuals hugging. So this is what it looks like, just during a regular afternoon. It's adjacent to downtown. People come here and just sit during their lunch. But it was really exciting to see, several of the protests that did take place, like the March for Equality, the Women's March, and seeing the engagement with people there, as well as the March for Our Lives around assault rifles. So really seeing how the work amplified the community there was kind of incredible. Corcoran Building Wrap was in Durham, North Carolina. And it was, as you can see, this large garage where, my process was to really examine kind of the architecture of these three distinct zones and distill them down into these very simple isometric drawings. I also did several community engagements to really discuss with the community, things that resonated with them and that they thought that then I could reincorporate back into the artwork. And a lot of my work really involves that sort of community engagement. So like in Durham, it's called Bull City, but bulls are everywhere, they're ubiquitous. So I asked the students, how could I reflect Bull City without just reproducing the bull? And they said the hand symbol. So that was something that, I was able to add back into my artwork without changing the overall vision. It has, sort of relationship with the civil rights movements. So elements were added in there. And so, it's very rewarding to kind of have a little bit of that collaboration with the community. This gives you a sense of the scale. The Boom and the Bust was for Art Prize in Grand Rapids. I was looking at this sort of conversation between a sort of economic boom and how certain communities don't have access to that. So particularly the Black and Hispanic community are not affected by the boom. In fact, there's a lot of homelessness and housing foreclosure. And so I sort of wanted to create this juxtaposition between large downtown development and something that reflect this sort of negative statistic around home ownership and access to housing. So this is a very early study. Some folks have been living out of cars. So, this was kind of the idea. Ended up going with this, which is just this sort of large brutalist-like development downtown, bifurcated by this steel grid structure with smaller homes in between. And these are like fabrication images. And so it's, brought to site in pieces and sort of fabricated, essentially, connected within those pieces. It's 25 feet tall. And really that idea of large scale development occurring simultaneously while there's a particular deficit in housing or relationship with the, lack of housing for certain communities. And Rotten It Labors is, as Aaron mentioned, my most recent project, Alexandria, Virginia. I was fascinated by the fact that it's beautiful, bucolic space, but with this sort of history of slave trading. It's the largest site of domestic slave trading. So I created these, metal profiles where they embodied a lot of the commercial industrial enterprise of Alexandria, Virginia, because it's inextricably connected to the slave trade, right? So the economy, the things that really buoyed and really made us a successful port city was directly tied both to the selling of slaves and owning of slaves and the labor of the free community. And so this is at night. They're very subtly lit, just like a light solar low up light. So this is it at dawn. And then, of course, pandemic hit. I was unable to visit, but excited to see all of the user engagement through Instagram. Thank you. So I will stop sharing and take you briefly through my apartment studio here in Brooklyn. I live, work right in the same place. So let me transfer over very quickly. Can you guys see and hear?
Totally.
Thumbs up?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So this is where I do much of my work. This is like my office / pandemic home gym. This is my board where I list all my deadlines and my projects. So these are currently all my public art projects right now. And this is literally the extent to which I have them organized, like just listed, and then it's just in my mind. So I just kind of know what's going on. I'm gonna be in an exhibit in the MoMA called Reconstructions. It's where 10 Black architects reimagine different cities. And so my city is Brooklyn, New York. It's sort of an extension of some of the renderings I showed you. But I mean, I fabricate things directly in my home. So this is like my foyer. And so this is a mailbox kiosk where I'm gonna have effectively, I've transformed the New York subway system into the New York City gateway system. So this would be like this kind of informal subway map kiosk. So there's a 32-inch screen and an LED display. I literally purchased a commercial multi-residential unit and built a frame in, and then built this mounting surface that I could then just wall mount the screen, mount the LED display, and then I'm going to get like a metal access panel cover over it. So it really looks like this sort of makeshift, subway map thing that uses like just everyday urban vernacular, right? So these are various elements. These are some dummy security cameras I'm considering adding. I kind of work on the fly. Actually, it's interesting because I do very little planning. I don't sketch much. I have an idea in my mind,
and then I just get right to working directly on the computer in the digital space. So moving into my living room, and again, my apartment is like a repository for like my artwork. And similar to Mark, there's various samples around, but here is another project. This is for a small solo exhibit at the Pod Space Gallery in Rockville, Maryland. And so these are a series of laser cut shipping containers that I'm going to paint a dark matte black and create the sort of installation, in addition to having, you know, these images. Actually, the black and white images that I showed you earlier, those are going to be the images are going to be large, like 7-8 feet tall. So, I mean, you know, I design it on the computer, I get it laser cut, I get it shipped right here. You know, I have samples all around. So this is actually from the Boom and the Bust. You know, when they were sending me, you know, the samples for the colors of the houses, you know, as well as the steel that they were going to use, you know, so everything's kind of just in these boxes. Similarly to Mark, I'm actually a very tidy person. I like my spaces. I'm one of those people that washes dishes as soon as I'm finished eating, you know? So here's another little hobby corner, again, with you know, just all the materials that I use. So these are some more pieces. These are like small scale oil drums that'll also be part of the installation. I just ordered this from like Alibaba Express to just get a like close-up look, right, of kind of what, you know, this shipping container looks like before, you know, going through the digital, you know, making the laser cut pieces. And so again, I have samples laying around. So I had a project at the MTA. There was a series of glass murals. And so these are the 2-foot by 2-foot, you know, large samples that came from Glass Mallory Peters' studio that I went with. This is for another public art project, actually, in Los Angeles. It's going to be a sort of mental health care facility. And so, you know, this is aluminum. It's going to be printed on this aluminum. It actually came out pretty nice. I had another project that I'm working on for the Charlotte airport. And so this was looking at a kind of ceramic 3D relief for that. And again, yeah, I just kind of have a lot of plants, artwork on my walls, you know, and you know, some more kind of smaller studies. So these are actually just paper craft, very early studies for the, what do you call it? The, you know, the crown ether. So these are just, Peppercore is a program where you can make a 3D model and then unfold that 3D model, print it out, and then fold it back up. So I'm actually just super, super low end analog kind of fabrication. This is a sample, another aluminum sample perforated for a project in El Paso. And so that is currently being fabricated. It's going to be installed very shortly. Here is the actual mail cabinet that I had to first remove before digging in there and, you know, working on this guy. And literally like I said, I don't do a lot of planning. So as of Saturday, this wasn't built. It wasn't even conceived. I was like, how am I going to do this? And so I had a conversation with a friend who was like, build a frame, put a mounting, you know, surface in there, and then boom, you're good. And so Saturday afternoon, I went to Home Depot, and then Sunday, I put it together. And now I'm working on a laser cover for that. So back to here and a little inception. Now I'm going to try and switch.
Hey, Lake, while you're doing that, someone did ask where specifically in Rockville your exhibit is going to be.
I'm not super familiar with Rockville enough to to know the exact address, but if they Google Pod Space Gallery, that's where it's going to be. It's like a really long, like storefront gallery. So it's going to be cool. Like imagine literally like storefront where you'd see mannequins, you know? So I'm excited about that. And that opens in January.
Cool.
All right, switching now.
So if anyone is, if you guys are able to turn on your cameras, we'd love it. And also if you turn on your cameras and put it in speaker view, or in gallery view, then you can see everyone. And feel free to put some questions. Vince and I can ask some questions, but please feel free to put them in the chat. You can physically raise your hand or raise your hand in the Zoom function, and we can call on you and we can just start chatting. There is a question, LEk, what kind of paint on the aluminum healthcare panels?
That's great. That's Alto. I'm going with a company called Alto Aluminum Panels, and they have this interesting process. And I spoke with a conservator who said that this is probably the best way to do painted aluminum, right? Because they have a kind of sublimation process that actually prints and then bakes and then layers the design directly into the aluminum. So it's actually not like stenciled or painted on the surface. It's great. Like I can scratch that thing up with a key. It looks like it's incredibly durable. So I'm excited about that.
Could you guys, well, LEk, did you have something else you wanted to show us, or?
No, that was it. That's
okay.
I would just have a small 2-bedroom apartment, you know.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to make sure. But I was wondering if you guys could talk a little bit about fabrication, because I know you don't do all your own fabrication. So do you have go-to fabricators, or is it on a case-by-case basis?
LEk, you want to go first?
No, for me, yeah, I'm not quite established enough for go-to fabricators. So for me, like I'm sort of only 3 years into this, and so much has happened. But for just the kind of ease of use and you know, kind of clarity, I make an effort to try and work with local fabricators whenever possible. I find that to be the best, and I'm learning the process right now. I have like 12 public art projects, and so like knowing who's good at it, it's great because I'm really learning who can do what, you know, who can do this quickly. You know, the aluminum question, that's something where I'm doing one process with the El Paso project and a completely different one with the LA project, because there's differences, but also kind of like a learning curve of how this works, you know. So I mean, that's how it works for me.
Yeah, and I think I'm a bit of a mix. I have a couple go-to fabricators that, I mean, public art fabricators are good because they just have an incredible resource, and they have a reservoir of knowledge that maybe industrial fabricators might not have, and they typically have a very high standard of fabrication. So I think it's certainly important to rely on public art fabricators in certain contexts. But as LEk said, ideally, if you could work with local fabricators, or work with them on portions of the project. Right now, I have a couple public art projects where I'm using a public art fabricator for the larger, more complex facets, and then using local fabricators to do some of the more detailed work and things that might be more easily done by a local fabricator. So I think it really depends on the project. It also depends on the turnaround. If it's a quick turnaround, you really want to work with someone that is seasoned in this type of work: fabrication, transport, delivery, and install. So it really varies from project to project, for me at least.
There's another question, wondering if usually, you know, you guys both have all these commissions going on all over. Do you usually envision, or do you ever envision an intervention for a specific location before they reach out to you? Or is it more them coming to you, or that you applying for, you know, a commission that someone already has a spot for?
I treat every project like, you know, like I mentioned, so much of this is based on my architectural practice. So I approach it like an architect, completely. So I don't try and do a whole lot until I understand the city and the site and the community and the environment, and and I work very much as if it's an architectural kind of process and project. Yeah, I can't think of a situation where I've, as we call it in the architectural studio world, shoehorning, right, which is a negative connotation. I can't think of a project where I've shoehorned something I've done into it. I take it city by city, case by case.
Yeah, same here. I think the only there aren't many instances that I've had an idea for a project before starting on it. The one that comes to mind is that smokers project I did here in New York. That was unusual because it was a grant that the Center for Craft Creativity and Design gave me to essentially explore my own environment. And so I had already been documenting kind of the steaming manhole covers of New York City for some time. So when I got that grant, it really allowed me to explore it more intensely. So that was a project that I had been thinking about, received the funds for, and then was able to execute it. But typically, like Lake said, it's very much going to a site and working with the community members, getting inspired by site history and site architecture, functionality of a site, and really allowing the site to push the narrative visually and conceptually. Ooh, books you are reading at the moment. Margaret, I like that one. Lake, you go. I'm not reading anything.
I read a lot. I'm always reading like 3 or 4 books at once. What am I reading? Why am I drawing a blank now? Circe is one. I think that's how you say it, Circe. It's a kind of reimagining of a Greek mythology. What is the other one? I'm drawing a blank. I read a lot of sci-fi as well. I don't know why I'm drawing a blank. Rosewood is what I'm reading. It's a sci-fi that takes place in Nigeria. But yeah, I don't know. I have them like in my Kindle. I read like you flip the channels, I get bored of one, then I jump onto the other for a while.
Oh my God.
These are the books I'm reading. It's just easier to just have the spines out.
Exactly.
You can see it's a pretty weird collection of books from, printed pictures. Studio Gang always has brilliant architecture books, public art, historical references, the history of music and 50 instruments, Robert Gober,
Nice.
Ohio Builds a Nation. It's a pretty eclectic collection. And I don't typically read from beginning to end. And I guess on my bedside table is I'm reading a lot of David Sedaris books, just because I think his I mean, they're funny and it's fun to read, but his writing about his public interactions is just really fun and playful, and that I think it's nice to engage in the public in a kind of like playful, interesting way. So that's kind of my bedside table book.
Can you talk more? Someone has a question, since you brought up communicating with other people, someone asked, what are the skills you both have to deal with communicating with so many different kinds of people to create your works?
That's a really good question. So communication it's key in everything from like your personal life to public art. It's just like, it's really extremely relevant. And we're in a time that communication is being suffocated or just really hard to do all the time. And so for me, as I go to a community, I really make it clear that I am an outsider and I'm aware of my being an outsider, and that when my project is gone, it's very likely, or when the project is done, it's very likely that I will also not be back or not back regularly enough to have kind of like to be a part of the community. So I try to be for me, it's important to be very transparent with the community members and make sure that I'm asking them a lot of questions and making sure that they feel a part of the process. And I talk with people in large groups, but I also talk to people individually. And I'm the creep at coffee shops if I'm going to a site, I would just be like, hey, how's it going? So I noticed you were reading this thing, or I'm just walking around the street. I'm like, hey, excuse me, can I ask you a couple questions? You just have to you have to put yourself out there, and you have to be open for weird conversations and political and ideological views that you might not agree with. But if you want to understand the DNA of a site, you really need to dig deep. And so for me, it's like, just try not to be judgmental, try to ask questions, try to have just to leave that conversation with kind of a shared reward that you both people left learning something new. And so I try to apply that to across the board, from public art to personal life, and it seems to work.
I agree with that completely, particularly the I am here, I am an outsider, I probably will not be back regularly. Yeah. Even through the course of the artwork, whether it's temporary or permanent. And also with community, in terms of communication, you also, like for me, it's very much trial by fire, because I work from home. I don't interact with other human beings that often at all. I'm kind of an introvert hermit. And you won't meet someone who hates talking on the phone, I guarantee you, more than myself. Even my mom knows this. She apologizes when she calls me and says it's only going to be 5 minutes. But I have to now talk to people on the phone all the time: program managers, community members, fabricators, engineers, and you have to connect. You are the kind of cord that binds every single person involved in this project, and there are many people involved in a project. You're the one that kind of coordinates between all of them. So communication is incredibly important. So, while I've had to adapt, I definitely appreciate being all of a sudden thrust into something that's so outside of who I am. And I've learned a lot because of it. Like Mark says, you have to engage with the community. You have to be open. You have to listen. You have to, be very transparent about what your intentions are. You will hear complaints. You know what I mean? You'll hear a lot from community members.
I've been to so many community meetings where I finish a presentation, they're like, "But will it take up parking?" I'm like,
exactly.
Yes, 2 spots, but it's totally worth it. It's totally worth it.
You'll meet community members who are just fundamentally against the idea of public art. So you won't win in that situation. And they will go to every community meeting just to get up and tell you that they don't like the entire endeavor of something, because it may take up parking. It may transform a space that they're used to, So it's a very fascinating, interesting process.
Greg, Aaron, sorry, I'm going to do your job for just a second, but I think Greg put up a good question. Lek, do you approach temporary projects differently from permanent ones? I think that's really fantastic.
That's a great one. Again, I'm so new to this. Or maybe not. I'm like, honestly, I'm really 3 years in. 2017 is when, Crown Ether was, and when protest, and, so I'm learning. For now, things like the budget tend to, as Mark mentioned, back to the fabrication question, if you can get a kind of a budget that allows a premier fabrication to do it, you know what I mean? And that tends to lean towards the more permanent, So in that regard, my approach would be, a premier public art fabrication firm, knowing they've done it a million times before, knowing it's going to work out. Temporary, many things you have to kind of consider. So I guess in a sense, but it might be beyond my own control. More of kind of reflection of budget that a temporary installation kind of carries. That's how to answer that.
I guess for me, I really like temporary projects a lot. And I like them a lot because I guess I'm kind of in the Christo school where he always considered temporary works more of a conversation. And I like that idea that you can explore materials that you could not explore in permanent works. Like permanent works, you're kind of isolated to aluminum, concrete, stainless steel, very limited types of woods, maybe some glass, but there is a ton of restrictions. Where temporary works, you can really play with materials, patinas, surfaces, in fabrication methods in a way that allows allows the work to be a bit freer. And so that is really nice for me. And just the, again, back to the conversation portion of it, like a temporary work allows you to put something out there, test a concept, test materials, see what the reaction is, see what the conversation is, and kind of pull away, learn from it, recalibrate and reinsert. And that's, of course, much harder to do. I mean, it's just not possible to do with permanent works, where permanent works always make me a bit uncomfortable because it's always like, now I've made my statement. Everyone knows. And so the permanent works just make me much more sensitive and thoughtful to every single decision I make, to make sure that it doesn't feel too bold or too overwhelming or too much me in the work. So there is, for me, a big difference, and I approach each of those types, temporary, permanent, slightly different.
See, that's a great answer.
I see Beatrice.
I learned a lot from that answer right there.
We have our youngest guest on here.
Fantastic way to look at it.
Yeah, I mean that's how I work with it.
I appreciate that answer. Like I'm like, okay, yeah, you're right.
Sure.
That's very true.
You guys, it's very sad that we're running out of time, but if anyone has one final question, or maybe Beatrice, since you are maybe our youngest guest, do you have any questions?
Yeah, shouldn't she be in school right now?
Yeah, what are you doing here?
I have like 15 minutes until my next class.
Well, do you have any questions, Beatrice?
I don't think so.
Okay, nope.
Oh, what are you naming your new baby?
Her name is.
Mark's a new dad of two. New father.
We just had our second daughter a couple weeks ago. Her name is Aya Diane Reigelman.
Oh.
We liked your names, but they didn't seem like they might fit long term. Beatrice had a lot of good names for her.
Permanent versus temporary.
Yeah.
Well, thanks again, everyone, for joining us. We really have enjoyed this series so far, and always love talking to you, Mark and LEk. Thank you so much for your time and participating and showing your spaces. If you look in the chat, there's the survey, which we would love for you to give us feedback so we can keep on making these better. This is the last one for the last of the Studio to Street series of this year, but we're gonna start them back up in January. So we'd love if you guys join us. We're doing some studio visits, we're doing some panel discussions, and then we're doing some like informational sessions with just Land Studio staff. And we're posting those on the Studio to Street website, but also our social media. So make sure you follow us. We'd love for you guys to share the events and join us. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you very much, Aaron and Land Studio.
Appreciate it.
Happy holidays, everybody.
Happy holidays, everyone.
Dave, enjoy the holidays. Stay safe.